Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to our newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com. Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. We hear a lot about the magic of AI these days, but perhaps not enough about how much or how little there is behind it. My guest today is Gary Smith, who writes about the other side of AI, its inflated claims, its false promises, misplaced expectations, and how little quote-unquote real intelligence there is behind AI's recent wonder, namely large language models that underpin applications such as ChatGPT. Gary has written several books, the last two of which have been called The AI Delusion and Distrust, Big Data, Data Torturing, and the Assault on Science. As a former editor of a journal called Big Data, my reaction is, ouch! You're not holding back, Gary. Gary's a professor of economics at Pomona College. Despite his warnings that people are fooled by phantom patterns in data, Gary has an eye for patterns, especially when it comes to identifying cases of where AI is really stupid. People like Gary keep everyone honest, and it's always fun exchanging views with him. Gary, welcome to Brave New World. I am delighted to have you on the show.
I'm delighted to be here.
Gary, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your journey been like, and how did you end up becoming an economist?
Yep. Well, I started out as a math major. I went to a small college in California, Harvey Mudd College, which was a science engineering college. They only had 4 majors: math, chemistry, physics, engineering. I was math. And then I was also on the debate team. And the debate topic one year was economics. It was resolved. The federal government should establish a national program of public works for the unemployed. And I thought econ is actually kind of cool because it uses math, and it talks about people, it talks about real things, and it's got models. And so it had a lot of stuff I liked. And I decided I wanted to be a professor because I saw what a great life all these professors were having. And econ seems like an easy thing for me. And so I did it. And then somehow I got into Yale Graduate School. I was there for 4 years. I was a macroeconomist, but my mentor, James Tobin, he said, we took a survey of the students, so we asked them what kind of classes they would like added to the curriculum. And the 2 big winners were Marxism and the stock market. I didn't want to do Marxism. And he said, well, why don't you do a stock market? And I said, well, I don't know anything about the stock market. And he said, that's okay. You can learn. And he recommended this book by John Burr Williams, which is the foundation of fundamental analysis. And so over time, I've become increasingly the stock market and statistics. And one thing I learned early on in both is correlation is not causation. And models that fit the past often don't do well predicting the future. That's a fundamental lesson of the stock market, is the past is a poor predictor of the future. And so I've been doing that for 50 years, and along comes AI, and all of a sudden data mining. When I was young, it was considered a sin, like plagiarism, and now data mining is considered a virtue. And I see all these people, AI is often data mining on steroids. And I see too many people who think that correlation supersedes causation. And you find a pattern in the data and you're supposed to believe it, even though there are essentially an infinite number of patterns in the data. And almost all of them are just coincidental. And so I got segued off. I'm still doing stats and finance, of course, but I got extremely interested in the paths that AI was taking. And so I've written now 4 books on that essentially: AI Delusion, Phantom Pattern Problem, 9 Pitfalls in Data Science, and now Distrust, Big Data, Data Torturing, and the Assault on Science. And they're all revolve around that same theme, which is, as simple as it sounds, correlation is not causation. And it's a lesson that not enough people believe it. They hear it, but they don't believe it. So that's my journey.
It's interesting how much we have in common. I also assume you read Graham and Dodd and
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
all that good stuff. Yeah, I think I brought machine learning to Wall Street, and at that time, you're right, it was called data mining.
Yep.
And that was like a terrible word, and it was an unfortunate sort of misnomer. Because I discovered that neither economists nor finance people were receptive to the machine learning methods that I was using for prediction.
Yep.
And I just sort of was scratching my head saying, like, what is going on here? Because, this is a new set of methods, that seem to have so much promise. And yet people just seemed like, academics especially, just seemed like incredibly reluctant to sort of even acknowledge it. If you didn't start with with a econometric model, people didn't even want to look at you. So yeah. I must say I've suffered on the other side of this, being a data miner in my old days. But I think that was sort of an unfortunate misnomer. But I guess, your larger point is very well taken, right? That people mistake, correlation for causation. And I think in your latest book, and I want you to say something more about this, I think you make the case that we somehow are wired up for this, right? We seem to be sort of wired up for, to be deceived, to be easily deceivable.
I'm no expert on anthropology or evolution or anything like that, but I'm told that our distant ancestors, pattern recognition was a key to reproduction and survival. And so a noise in the bushes might be a predator, and birds squawking overhead might be a sign of a predator, and elephants marching in a line might be leading us to water. And recognizing these patterns actually had great survival value. And nowadays, of course, the data we see are much more, I don't know what the right word is, but it's not as direct. And so measures of GDP and interest rates and unemployment and stock prices is not at all like zebras being chased by lions or elephants leading us to water. And they're much more abstract. And it's kind of hard to get our minds around structural models of that kind of stuff. And I think we are hardwired to look for patterns because it gives us comfort. And a lot of things about AI today, I think, when people talk about the difference between large language models and the human brain, what people say, and again, I'm not an expert on this, is the human brain tries to make sense of things. And so one reason it can learn a lot quicker than large models. You take a large model, an image recognition model, and they look at 1 million pictures of a wagon. And they look at the pixels and they put a label with it, and they look at another picture, put a label with it. And after millions of pictures, they see a new picture, and they might know it's a wagon or they might not, because maybe it's blue and all the other wagons they looked at were red, or maybe it's sideways, or maybe it's made out of plastic instead of wood, or wood instead of plastic, or whatever reason. But somehow humans, all we have to do is look at a couple wagons, and somehow we grasp the essence of a wagon. There's a box, there's a wheel, there's a handle, and you can pull it or push it. You can ride in it, you can carry things in it. And somehow we were able to make sense of these things. And what people tell me is that that's the great advantage of the human brain over big data, is that our brain tries very hard to make sense of things. And of course, sometimes it gets fooled because it sees patterns which are in fact just coincidental, and it interprets them as being meaningful when they're in fact meaningless. Going back to your earlier point, I remember very clearly when I was at the Coles Foundation at Yale, and an outside speaker would come in and present some results, and people who didn't like it would whisper next to each other, data mining. and that was it was an insult. It was like, what a goof there is up there. And that is I've been scarred by that from your standpoint.
So Gary, let me play devil's advocate for a little bit here, right? So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I guess there's two parts to my question. One is that, do we overestimate our own capacity to come up with good theories, right? So, the traditional model of science has been, you think hard, you come up with a hypothesis, you think some more, you refine it, and then you sort of put it to the test, right?
Yep.
And, you either reject the null hypothesis or you don't, right? So that's kind of, tried and true scientific process. It served us really well, right? Now, along comes a machine, and now the machine is capable of generating hypotheses. And I guess I don't think the philosophers of science, in the 18th, 19th century sort of ever envisioned this. I'm guessing they didn't imagine that there'd be this machine generating hypotheses. Is your problem with the fact that we've gotten sloppy, or are you sort of, fundamentally uneasy with this notion of ideas or a hypothesis coming from the machine?
Yeah. Well, part of the first part of your question, I hear people tell me that we overestimate the human brain, and really all we are is like a machine. We are just looking for patterns, just like they are, and we're not doing anything that a machine could not do. And I think from the beginning of AI back in the 1950s, that conference at Dartmouth, I think the idea was data come in, it gets looked at, and output comes out. That's what a machine does, and that's what the brain does. So why can't a machine do the same thing the brain does? And of course, it's been 70 years now, and we still can't mimic the human brain. But the second part of your question, so as you know, looking at a bunch of data, finding a pattern, and then making up a theory after the fact, it's called harking, hypothesizing after the results are known. And I think the harsh sound of that word is supposed to represent the fact that it's a bad practice. And from my standpoint, the reason it's a bad practice is that there are so many patterns that could be discovered. And it's very easy to make up a theory after the fact. And there's no way of telling for a machine to tell whether the theory makes any sense or not.
But might you be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Surely there are patterns in the universe that the human mind may not be capable of even conjecturing.
I agree. And so a lot of those hypotheses, the traditional scientific method, you have hypotheses, you gather data, ideally through a randomized controlled trial, and you test your theory. A lot of those hypotheses came from noticing patterns in the data, looking at things like sailors who sucked on limes didn't get scurvy. So maybe we should test whether limes or lemons or oranges actually prevent scurvy. So a lot of those things come from observation.
Yeah, the double helix too, right? Arguably, came from observation.
A lot of those things, we observe something and then we go out and test it. And the problem with large computers these days is they're essentially a black box. And so you put the data in and it comes out, you ought to be hired, you ought to be fired, you ought to go to prison, we ought to buy Apple stock, and you have no idea where it came up with that recommendation. So there's no way to test it with fresh data, because you just have to trust the black box. And that company you started, was it totally black box? The data mining company you did for stock picking, was it a totally black box model?
No, it was not, because at that time, and I'm talking late 90s, if you ever told anyone that you were using neural nets, that was the end of the conversation, right? But this is exactly my point, right? That humans tend to be such herd animals, right? The sense I get is it's not like people out there really understand AI now, even the believers. They just believe it because a lot of other people seem to believe it. But this time around, the capability is pretty impressive, isn't it? In terms of the things that machines are able to do, like converse with us, however buggy that might be.
No, it's astonishing the things machines do. It's just absolutely astonishing. And you and I, we use computers every day of our lives to do astonishing things and not just generate sentences. I mean, to do mathematical calculations, Monte Carlo simulations, statistical stuff that would, take us years to do by hand. But back to that point I asked before, what would you think if somebody comes to you as a potential managed fund manager and says, I've got a black box model and it eliminates all subjectivity on the part of the humans? Because computers people say this, computers are smarter than us. I have no idea how it comes up with these things, but it's worked really well on past data. And so, would you like to invest $1 million? What would your response be?
So, okay. So I realized that I didn't finish answering your question, right? So the one thing I wasn't going to be using is neural networks, because I was well aware that was going to be a conversation ender. And so, I actually took several years off from academia and I went to Wall Street, and the guy who brought me in there was running a prop trading group, which is why he brought me in. But he said, while you're here, do something else that's sort of useful to the business, because trading is a very uncertain sort of business, I think we'll be successful, but, help the business. So I did. I did things like, analyzing client data to, help managers figure out, what were good sales strategies versus what weren't. But to come back to your question about the market prediction algorithms, no, they were basically like rule induction kinds of algorithms, right? So my very first project I told the prop trading group, I said, just give me all the trades you've done and I'll tell you if you could have done better. And so they did. They gave me a bunch of trades. To those trades, I sort of appended, what was the state of the market at the time that the trades were made. I cranked them through like a genetic rule learner and tested it as rigorously as I possibly could. Yeah, I'm aware of the statement you made earlier, which is that, it's difficult to test these, and you're absolutely right. But I was as rigorous as I could be, and I went to the meeting. We used to have weekly meetings, and I said, "Oh, I found something, but I have no idea what it is." And they said, "Well, what'd you find?" And I said, when the 30-day volatility is in the lowest quartile, your trades tend to be 3 times as profitable as they are otherwise. Like, silence around the room. And then they all started cursing each other. And I said, hey, guys, can you tell me what's going on? Like, does this make any sense? And they said, it makes a lot of sense, but we can't tell you exactly why, because every time volatility spikes, we just tend to lose a lot of money. And so it's interesting that you, who know nothing about what we do,
right,
is telling us that volatility really matters. And you seem to have sort of calibrated it. To sort of cut a long story short, it turns out that when I went and looked at the Journal of Finance and a lot of finance articles, I basically found and calibrated the effects of volatility on the yield curve, right? So that's sort of what I discovered after the fact, but I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing when I was looking for, what conditions made their strategies profitable and unprofitable. So to me, that was actually a very positive experience, that I came up with something that seemed to have at least a quasi rational sort of, economic or finance interpretation to it.
Yeah, you weren't a black box. My co-author on a couple of these books, Jay Cordes, he worked for a while at a trading company like you were talking about. He came in as a data scientist, and they said, here's all this data, find us a profitable trading rule. And so he said, I don't think that's a great idea. There's no, just do it. And so he came back with some crazy systems, and it was inside the black box, and they could make some crazy amount of money, like literally 2,000% a day or something with his trading rule. And he said, it's too good to be true. And they said, no, we're going to try it. And of course it flopped miserably, because it was just, he found, and then he'd tweak it and it would be profitable again, back testing. And then they'd try it, it wouldn't work, tweak it, profitable back testing, wouldn't work. And so that's very different from your experience. You actually had a story.
I have a story, but I guess my method was, let the data speak, but I was trying to be as careful as possible. And by the way, I'm very sensitive to what you're saying, because I've made many of the mistakes that you're pointing out, in being too eager to believe a result. And, the longer I sort of stayed in that business, the more I realized sort of, what sort of realistic expectations should be. And so after a while, I got good at sort of reading a result and saying, I don't believe it, or, that looks interesting, but
too good to be true. Yep.
Yeah. But I guess my larger point is that, we seemed at that time to be very quick to dismiss methods that we weren't trained in, or that we just didn't like for some reason, maybe because we couldn't prove theorems about them, right?
I'll plead guilty to that. Yep.
But they seem to have something, to them.
But I like, go back to what we said at the start. I mean, don't you love John Burr Williams and Dodd and Graham and all that stuff that actually makes sense, and value investing makes sense?
Absolutely. I mean, and at the end of the day, that's sort of what I look for, is some sort of an interpretation of, why am I finding what I'm finding? But I'm going to, I guess, defer a little bit about, I guess you called it HARC or FARC, that in fact, sometimes, it's not altogether absurd to actually think of building theory from data, as long as you're careful about it,
And if you could test it with fresh data.
As long as you can test it with fresh data. I mean, it reminds me of this Feynman quote, right? The easiest person to fool is yourself.
That's right. Exactly.
So, you should be especially careful about that.
There's also, I was going to give you that quotation earlier while you were talking about the things you've learned on Wall Street. I also love the Danish proverb that it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
Yeah, is that Danish or is that a Yogi
I believe
Berra
it's
thing?
Danish,
Yeah.
but it's been used by a lot of people have been ascribed to. But I think it's some Danish proverb. But in Wall Street, it's really good. It's really easy to predict the past.
Indeed. So let's pick up on these language models, which I guess you've also been very critical of. Yeah. And, I've had two recent guests who've, one of my colleagues, Sam Bowman, who's an NLP guy, and Raphael Millier, who's a philosopher who's sort of, goes deep under the hood of these large language models. And the way I see the community now, there's a spectrum. There's a pretty wide spectrum of hardcore sort of unbridled enthusiasts and sort of pretty, deep skeptics, right? And I guess I sort of put myself in the center only because I've, lived through these paradigm shifts in AI, 3 of them during my lifetime. And I guess as an insider, my expectations are low, right? So when I see something impressive, I'm like, really? Like, it's actually working, right? Because for most of my career, AI has been a disappointment, right? That the actual results have actually fallen far short of hopes and expectations. I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing around me in terms of these large language models, right? And I wrote this article about, and picking up on one of Jeff Hinton's quotes that, it's like where, we've got aliens who speak English and we're having a hard time like taking it all in because they speak such good English, right? And so we tend to sort of anthropomorphize them and have these sort of great expectations of them. I guess that's sort of part of your criticism, isn't it?
Yeah. And so, I mean, like you say, AI has this long history of overpromising and underdelivering. And so it builds a skepticism into this thing. We've had AI winters in the past, but this LLM stuff is truly amazing. And it's just a full-blown Eliza effect where you anthropomorphize and you think, I really am talking to something like myself, maybe something even smarter than myself. It certainly knows a lot more facts than myself. And I'm hardly alone with skepticism. You got a couple of colleagues there at NYU, Ernie Davis and Gary Marcus, who are also big skeptics. I don't know if you ever talked with them. But.
Yes. No, in fact, I was on a panel with both of them at one point. This is way before all the hype. So this was a very rational, low-key sort of discussion about AI, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But I'd love to be on that panel again. But what's your sort of core issue with language models? Like, so some people say, well, they don't understand anything, right? And I think
that's me.
Is that you? Okay. So I think that's a little uncharitable, isn't it? That they don't understand anything. Like, how could they speak so well if they didn't understand anything? I guess is the question.
That's the puzzle. And so, they are text generators and they are stochastic statistical text generators that do a really good job of that. But you give them any kind of test that involves critical thinking, and unless it's somewhere in their database, they'll flop. And before I do that, though, let me give you, this whole thing about, it's called hallucination, which is anthropomorphizing again, coming up with facts and asserting them confidently when it's completely wrong, complete BS. And if they actually understood words, they wouldn't do stuff like that. So just before we got on, I asked ChatGPT to write a biography of you. Okay? And here's what it says. It's perfect. It's perfect LLM. And that it's like, it was more than 500 words. It's extremely verbose and extremely complimentary. And it doesn't, it's human-like in the sense that it's coherent, but it's not human-like in the sense that it just goes on and on and on with all this stuff. But here's some of the facts. Quote, facts. Pursued his undergraduate degrees in computer science and engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology. Now, you did go there. Was that where your degrees were in?
That is correct, yeah.
Graduating at the top of his class. I assume that's correct.
That is not correct.
His exceptional academic performance earned him a scholarship to pursue a PhD in computer science from Columbia University in New York City.
Okay, hallucination. All right.
In the late 1990s, he co-founded Infosys Technologies, a global consulting and IT services company.
I wish.
I knew that one was wrong.
Yeah. Well, it may have.
You'd be living in Bali if that was true.
I am a friend of Nandan Nilekani, who was a guest on the podcast last year. But Nandan is a co-founder of Infosys. So yeah. So clearly, it's
they must have found that on a page somewhere. Your name in that place.
Possibly.
It goes on. Yeah. In 2003, Vasant joined the faculty of the Stern School of Business as a professor of information systems.
Okay, yeah, 20 years too late. Yeah,
the year's completely wrong.
Yeah, the year's
and
wrong.
I don't think you're a professor of information systems. I think you're a professor of something else.
At that time, yes, that's true.
Oh, you were?
Okay. That's correct. Yeah, year's wrong.
As an esteemed professor, Vasant has been recognized with several accolades, a recipient of the Informs Design Science Award.
I've got to look into that.
Maybe received it without. They never contacted you.
I may have missed that award completely.
So that's part of the evidence.
Yeah,
but part of it also is like simple reason, not simple reason, but anything that requires any kind of complex reasoning. So, do you know this little puzzle? I've got 3 cards. One is red on both sides. One is blue on both sides. One is red on one side and blue on the other. I pick a card at random, look at a side at random, it's red. What's the probability the other side is red? And the common sense answer is, well, you've ruled out blue, so it must be 50-50. And then the smart answer is, well, there's 6 equally likely sides you could have seen. 3 of them are red, and 2 of those red sides come from the red card. Okay. So I asked Bard and I asked ChatGPT the same question, but I did a little tweak on it. One card's red, one's blue, one is red on one side and green on the other. You pick a card that's red, you see the red side. What's the probability the other side is green? And so Bard, it found a YouTube video of the classic problem, and it went through it, and it got confused because it started talking about a card that's blue on one side and red on the other, and a card that's blue on one side, or red on one side and green on the other. But it came up with the answer 2/3. Which is the answer to the different question than the one I asked, because I asked for the green, the opposite color. And then ChatGPT came up with an answer of 0.
Oh, really?
Which you and I would know is absolutely cannot possibly be true.
Right.
What is the probability the other side is green? It's certainly not 0. And it took 434 words to get this answer. And then it explained it as follows. Looking at the red card, the red side, did not tell you anything you didn't know already, which would suggest the answer is 1/3. And then the next sentence was, by seeing the red side, you've ruled out blue, so you have 2 equally likely things left, which would suggest the answer is 1/2. So its conclusion gave 2 contradictory answers and contradicted its main answer, which was 0. Now, if it actually knew what it was talking about, it would know 0 is not the right answer. It would not give 3 contradictory answers. And so that's why I'm still firmly in the belief that if you ask it to think anything that involves critical thinking, it is likely to stumble, unless it's seen it somewhere in its huge, vast database. Like that original question, if I'd given the question the way it's normally given, it could have answered it perfectly, because it's really good at that kind of stuff. But you give it something where you have to actually understand the question, and it has trouble.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, and it has these colossal flops every once in a while. You and I guess privately discussed the sentence about, the trophy didn't fit in the brown suitcase because it was too small. What's the it? And that problem's been around forever.
That's an Ernie Davis problem. It's been around for years. How could it not know the answer to that? I mean, but the weird thing, Gary, is that, we talked about this, and I waited a week and I asked it again and it got it right. It said, "Oh, it's the brown suitcase," and I said, "Oh, all right." This thing is like really learning. It's getting smart quickly, and I almost sort of expected that, right? Because it does seem to, it does seem to get better, or at least that's what I thought. And then just before we started talking today, I said, "Oh, let me just go check again, see if it still gets it right." And to my disappointment, it went back and said it was the trophy. And then I said, how can anything be too small, to fit into something?
and it said,
Yep.
"You're absolutely right. There's a complete contradiction in what I'm saying. It's obviously the suitcase, right?"
Yeah.
Now, so I totally get it, right? But on the other hand, the fact that it is able to say, "Hey, you're right," it's actually a
Yeah.
contradiction, right? I mean,
Yeah.
hasn't it actually learned
Well, those two
to
things.
generalize some things?
One thing is that it's had since the beginning. It's had these human handlers, and so part of its thing is it trains on these big databases, but then it goes through all this testing, where if it gives wrong answers, it gets a beep, and it learns through the human handlers telling bad answers, good answers, and it's still doing that. When you go to ChatGPT, it says right at the start, your questions and answers are being monitored by our staff to improve its accuracy. And you also have little buttons you can say, do I like the answer or not like the answer? And so they can go in, and that's the humans making it smarter. It's not making itself smarter. It's the humans making it smarter. And that other thing about, oh, I'm so sorry. Well, that's been programmed in there. If you disagree with it, like if I'd done that biography and I said I was you, and I said, oh, I did not go to business school in Columbia, they would have said, oh, I'm so sorry. I will correct that. They would have said something like that. They're programmed to say stuff like that. And that's not them actually thinking. That's just built into the system.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean, if you push it, there was another time when it actually gave me the right answer, and I said, "Are you sure?" And it said, "Oops!" Like, so you're right, because oftentimes that's the right thing to do, right? Like someone sort of corrects you, but this time I was just messing with it. So I sort of really messed with it. And I said, "Oh, you're absolutely right." I was, "Oh, I'm so disappointed." You were actually right the first time. But I guess all said and done, there's reason to believe that it actually does have some sort of an organization of knowledge in place there. It's not perfect, far from it, but nor is ours. But aren't these? But isn't this what we should expect to see? On the road to intelligence, right? You said earlier we've been at this for 70 years. Well, it's a hard problem, right? I mean, understanding the human brain, is a hard problem.
Yeah.
It might take another 70 years. Yeah, who knows, right? But I think in my lifetime, I've seen some real progress in AI, right? Compared to sort of the expert systems days to where we are now. I'm amazed, quite frankly.
But those people at the start, really, really smart people, they were saying in 5 to 10 years, we'd have computers that could do anything an average man could do. And it's taken a lot longer.
Yeah, sure. In fact, Herb Simon was one of my mentors, and he's sort of famous
there you
for,
go. He's
I
one
guess,
of those guys.
I guilty as charged, right? I mean, he said that the computer would be a chess champion in 10 years. Well, it took 30, but it did, and now it is the chess champion. So ultimately he was right, wasn't he? It just took a lot longer than we expected.
But that's a good example, because you take a very well-defined situation, where here are the rules, here are the parameters, here's the objective. And they're really good at that kind of narrow thing. But you take a game like Go, which we didn't think that they would be able to win at Go, like for who knows how long. And all of a sudden computers are winning at Go. But if you change the dimensions of the board, it completely falls apart. Or they had I can't remember who did it. They started playing Go, the humans started playing Go badly. And the computer got completely thrown off because it hadn't been trained against bad players. and the bad player was able to beat the computer because the computer didn't actually understand the game. It didn't have strategy. It just knew certain sequences of moves tended to work. But sequences of moves that it was unfamiliar with didn't work. Or you change the dimensions of the board, it doesn't know what to do because it doesn't actually see the board. It doesn't have a visual sense of where pieces go and where good moves are and bad moves are. But let me ask you this question, though, which I think is the fundamental thing. And this goes back to my first book, The AI Delusion, that the real problem today is not that computers are smarter than us, but that we think they're smarter than us, and we trust them to make decisions they shouldn't be trusted to make. And so we've got people out there in the real world who are trying to price auto insurance, approve loans, give people jobs, determine prison sentences based on AI algorithms. And do you think that AI is anywhere near being able to do that? And secondly, is large language models ever going to be able to do that? Don't you need, even Sam Altman says, we've kind of scaled up as far as we can scale. The CEO of OpenMind, we've scaled up about as far as we can go. We need to do something different to get to the next level. We can't just scale up LLMs and do things that are useful, like the things I just talked about. Do you agree or disagree with that idea?
No, I mean, look, it's hard to disagree with that, right? I mean, I think that the scaling
But people
laws,
are doing it. But
you know,
people are doing it in the real world. They're making those kinds of decisions.
so let's back up a second, right? So,
Yeah.
I think we should sort of distinguish between areas such as criminal sentencing, law enforcement, stuff like that, versus what I consider sort of low risk kinds of problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so, with things like criminal sentencing, Danny Kahneman has a great book a couple of years ago, Noise, where he actually shows that, so for crimes where the average sentence was 7 years, the difference between two judges picked at random was 4 years. So over half the time, it was more than 4 years, meaning that you could end up with a sentence of 3 or 11 years in prison, depending on the judge's mood, which could be driven by whether his football team won or lost on Sunday. So although I question the wisdom of handing that decision to the machine, humans aren't doing a great job either. And the variance among humans is undesirable and unfair. When it comes to insurance, well, I'm not sure, right? I mean, that's a situation where, I might argue that, a machine might actually be able to see things that a human underwriter may not have noticed until now. So there I see the sort of almost like a synergy, and it's funny you ask this because I'm actually doing a research project with an insurance company at the moment where the idea is to make the humans better using AI. And the way I see this is that, the human could express what they want to do. The machine can express what it thinks the human should do. And then the human, can make a decision. Right.
Right.
And one should be able to test this. But I suspect it's very difficult to do that in a real business, right? To be able to, to be doing these kinds of tests. But on the insurance side, I'd say, I think there's sort of a real role for machines and AI to make humans better. And then you have these sort of low, completely sort of much lower risk decisions where you might completely automate it, right? Where the machine might actually do a better job and the mistakes it makes aren't that costly. And you say, well, I can live with that. And trading would be one of them, right? So if I'm making lots of trades, and not taking that much risk per trade, I'm making multiple bets for situations like that, I'd say, yeah, I trust the machine to do it. How do you think about that?
I agree completely with that. And Sam Altman, to his credit, has also said that it should not be used for anything with important costs or consequences. And so for low risk things, it's fine. It recommends a restaurant to you, and it's a bad recommendation. So what? but it turns you down for a job. That's an important thing. Now, on insurance, there's Britain's largest car insurance company was going to price insurance based on the words people use on Facebook. And so, and they had this whole thing, and it was things. It started off, we're going to use things like, do you set a time or do you say I'll see you later? And then AI just went off on a tangent, and it got up with things like, do you like Michael Jordan or Leonard Cohen more? And the head of this thing at this company said, the great thing about it is we don't use fixed things like normal insurance companies. We're constantly updating and changing the words we look at. And the day before they launched, Facebook stepped in and said, actually, we have some clause in our contract that says you cannot use Facebook data to price insurance. I don't know why that's there, but it was there. Or give you another one. There's a Chinese loan company, and they said, we don't use conventional things like your income or your assets or whether you pay your bills on time. We're going to look at these things. Do you keep your phone charged? When your phone rings, how long does it take you to answer it? Do you have an iPhone or an alternative to an iPhone? And people believe this junk.
But Gary, I hear you, and I know you've got plenty of such examples up your sleeve.
Yeah,
right? So,
I sure do.
You've got this example of an octopus picking a soccer team that's going to win, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's like laughable, right? And
except some people believe it.
I know, but I think, but I guess your larger point is, come on, guys, like start thinking, right? And be a little more critical as opposed to sort of, being sort of completely dismissive of the technology itself, right?
Now, what you and I are seeing, I don't know how you feel about this. from my point of view, there's going to be an AI stock market bubble, and the companies that are rushing out there to issue stock based on the premise that we've got some great AI, we've got a great version of a large language model, and we're going to make a bunch of money. Details to be given later. They're going to raise a bunch of money, and a lot of that is going to be just down the drain. And there are a lot of global investors who hear the word AI or hear the word ChatGPT or large language models or Bard or Google or whatever, and they'll just throw money at it out of blind faith.
Yeah, no, I fear you might be right, and it's sort of this herd mentality that I was referring to earlier.
Oh, definitely, like the dot-com bubble.
Indeed, it reminds me of sort of exactly the internet bubble. In fact, strangely enough, that's when I was on Wall Street when the browser first sort of came into the market, and people were saying, like, what is this? Like, trying to get their heads around the internet, and will people actually transact on it? And there was a boom, and many people lost their shirts investing in internet companies, but a few really took off, which is probably what we're going to see again.
Oh, for sure. I got to tell you, one of my sons was there at the start. He was just graduating from Swarthmore College, and he and a couple other guys, some guys from Yale, formed this company, and there were 5 of them. And they rented a house in New Hampshire. They wanted to be out there, but they wanted to be in a cheap tax state. So they're across the border from Massachusetts, Taxachusetts. And they had 5 bedrooms upstairs, and downstairs were all these computers. And they were actually written up in major newspapers about the new world, the new economy. These 5 kids commuted to work by walking downstairs. And so I asked my son, what did you guys do? And he said, I don't know, but we're nimble. We're smart and nimble, and so when an opportunity arises, we'll seize it with both hands. And they were all really smart, and they were nimble and so on, but they didn't have any firm idea. They had no business plan, nothing except we're going to cash in. And sure enough, like within 4 months of founding, somebody bought them out because they were smart and nimble. It's a lot. I think it's a lot today. Is you say I got this great algorithm, and I need to raise some money, and you're going to make a lot of money, and who needs a business plan?
Yeah,
who needs details?
I hear you, but let's. I guess I was going to say let's get serious here.
And you talk exactly like one of my colleagues, Tehran Drabi from Pakistan. That's one of his favorite phrases. Let's get serious.
Let's get serious here. So, but so what advice would you give, executives? I was at a bank giving a talk a couple of weeks ago just on AI and where it's going, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and I just sort of tossed out this statement there saying, do you think AI could be as big as electricity, right? Or just to be provocative, right? Does this sound absurd? And the reaction I got was, no, I don't think it's absurd. I think it could be bigger. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And it's gotten me thinking, but what do you tell executives when they come to you as sort of Mr. Uber skeptic? Do you say, just ignore it? This is like, it'll blow over, or do you tell them, look,
I tell them to be skeptical. And I tell them to be especially skeptical about black box things. And so, Warren Buffett's got the famous thing that if you don't understand it, don't invest in it. And so somebody comes to you with an algorithm or a plan, and we can't explain to you how it works, or even worse, well, I don't know how it works, but it works. That's the time to be skeptical. And what you got to do, it depends on the context, obviously, but what you got to do is testing with some kind of fresh data. Don't just rely on the back testing that did really well in predicting, say, a stock market things in the past, but give us some fresh data and see how well it does. Or predicting insurance claims, or predicting recidivism in criminal sentences, or predicting defaults on loan payments. All those things. You got to have some fresh data to test it, and that's the bottom. Don't take it on faith. You got to see some empirical evidence first. It'd be nice to understand it. Like I saw a guy. He's a professor of criminology and statistics at University of Pennsylvania, and he said it was a criminology, and he said these things come up with all sorts of stuff that you don't anticipate, and it's frankly black box. And so it might be sunspots. It might be the wristband on their arm. And I don't care. As long as it works, it works. Or as my co-author Jay Cordes, when he was out in the real world, he said one of the favorite expressions of his boss was "up is up," and so if it works, great, and I don't care why it works or how it works. If it works, it works, and it was all, of course, it worked with backtesting, and then they rolled it out and they tried to do it with real world data, and it flopped because up is not always up.
Yeah, I get it. And, I guess the larger point is that we really need to understand what's going on under the hood. And, to be fair, there's a lot of activity sort of around that.
And these large language models, I don't know firsthand, but I hear that even the people working on them are surprised by the things it does. They don't know exactly how it does it. How these things work, how they come up with the stuff they come up with, and it's just mind-boggling, even for insiders.
I think they are pleasantly surprised. I asked Sam Bowman this question, like, what was it that sort of provided this sort of, jump in performance, or what's different? And his response was that it was just serendipity, that we just sort of picked a prediction problem that is autocomplete, that was sort of just hard enough to be able to solve well. And if you manage to solve that problem really well and do really well at that prediction, it required you to sort of acquire an ancillary capability in order to do that. And that's what we seem to be trying to understand now and get our heads around, right? How does it do it? So I guess it's a good problem to have in a sense, right? It's better than just everything just flopping and falling short of expectations, right? Here we have the opposite problem, which is like, how the hell does it speak so well? What enables it to do that?
That's my understanding too. That started out just as we want to have a really great autocomplete model, and it morphed into something far beyond that. But it's not all good. I mean, there's incredible potential for harm from these things. Disinformation, deep fakes, all sorts of stuff that is, what was it that I saw the other day? Something like within 5 years, 80% of the stuff on the internet is to be generated by large language models. And some of the stuff generated will be true and some will be false. And how are we going to know which is which? Like that biography of you. that could well show up on the internet. Or there have been these cases. There was a professor at I can't remember where he was, Columbia or somewhere, law professor. And this thing circulated about he'd gone on some camping trip with his students and was accused of sexual harassment. There had been a story in the Wall Street Journal or something about it. It was totally fictitious.
That's right.
It totally made up. But then you get bad actors who want to damage reputation of you or me, and they have ChatGPT or Bard or any other of these large language models generate hundreds, thousands of stories that accuse us of all sorts of things that we never did. And how do we save our reputation?
So, Gary, one of the things I guess that people don't appreciate enough is that things that humans find difficult may not be things that machines find difficult, and vice versa. And this reminds me of the writer's strike, right? That's going on at the moment, right?
That's right.
Versus the studios, right? And that's a great example of where a machine could actually displace these writers, couldn't it?
I think this is a really great test, and I'm wondering what's going on. Are the studios going to use the large language models to write the scripts for them? This is the perfect opportunity to test how good they are.
I would think so, right? I mean, at least I think they'd want the option to be able to do that, to say, write me a script for Play It Against Sam, but set it in Harlem and put the appropriate language in there, right? And it'll probably do that.
Or just write the opening dialogue for the Jimmy Kimmel Show or something,
Something like that, right? So it seems like
I doubt if there's any
for things like this, it's pretty darn good, isn't it?
I would think. I doubt if there's anything in the contracts that prohibit studios from doing that. So
yeah,
why haven't they done it? I don't think they're doing it.
Well, I think that's a huge sticking point. I was talking to someone who's actually plugged into these negotiations, and I said, I haven't heard ChatGPT mentioned anyway. He says, believe me, it's in there, right? They basically want to prohibit the studios, from doing that. It's like, that's a losing battle. That's not going to happen.
But they're not currently prohibited, right? So they could keep generating scripts and keep running
They can,
late night shows.
Yeah. No,
But I don't think they are.
Well, yeah, I think it'll be an interesting test, but I guess if I were to make a prediction, which I should not be doing, I'd say that, in a few years, we probably will see, scripts and, wait till the video equivalent of ChatGPT comes where you say, well, just shoot it. And,
fakes,
and make up the actors and make them look like this. I mean, I don't see any sort of, conceptual barriers.
And it's one of those things where the cost of failure are low. And so Jimmy Kimmel tells a bad joke, and who cares? It's very different than a prison sentence or getting rejected for a job or something like that, where the consequences are actually important.
Yeah. So what do you think this is going to do to work more generally? Because I know you've written about it. I read an interesting piece that you wrote, and this is sort of front and center, right? How is AI going to transform work? And this writer strike, I think, is an example of where it could actually make a huge dent in creative professions, right? Because because it speaks so well, and soon it'll be able to draw well and create amazing videos. So,
well, a lot of the stuff that's been done about predicting which jobs are most at risk is utter nonsense. And so one of them I write about is there was some model, and they came up with all these categories, what skills are required for certain jobs, and blah, 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 blah. And they concluded that butchers and heart surgeons are very similar. And the jobs that are most at risk were heart surgeons because they have to think more. And I'm not making this up. As computers can think, they're going to take away the jobs from heart surgeons. And they also had judges or Federal Reserve Board members. Those jobs were at risk because they involve thinking. And my view is anything that requires critical thinking is going to be safe for a while, like the jobs we have, you and I, being college professors. And I think it might actually have a good effect on education, in that things we can do that computers can't do is try and help students to be better communicators and to use critical thinking skills. And if education evolves towards more critical thinking, more communication, more group projects, stuff like that, it's going to be great. And our jobs are going to be safe. I mean, if we were just answer multiple choice questions, we'd be out of work tomorrow. I guess we have tenure. We're not going to be out of work tomorrow. But if our jobs were just memorize these facts and answer these multiple choice questions, our jobs would be at risk.
So, Gary, I'm not as sure about that whether teachers are, might not also be on the chopping block. But I'm going to come back to that in a second. You also mentioned judges, and I suspect that, to the extent that machines actually start replacing or augmenting judges, it may be because judges are so bad, right? Or inconsistent, right? That there's so much noise that we might actually be better off socially by, getting a machine to do the heavy lifting, and then, I don't know, just sort of helping judges do a better job. But let's come back to...
Well, I can't see a large language model doing that. Let me give you another example before we go on. There's an article recently about, there's a tax advisory firm, and they've got a website where people could send in questions for tax advice. And they took the questions that had been sent in, and they gave them to an AI system to answer. I think it was ChatGPT 3.5. And it got every single question wrong because it knew certain facts of the tax code, but it's like that green card, red card thing. Little subtleties in there would trip it up. And so in one of the examples, it forgot that Florida doesn't have a state income tax. And so it gave some advice which was wrong because it neglected the fact that was a relevant thing to take into account. And in the judges thing, how is a large language model going to know what facts are important, what facts are relevant? It doesn't know what words mean. How is it going to know what is important evidence, what is unimportant evidence, what is evidence that this person might commit another crime if they go out into society? How is it going to know those things when it doesn't know what words mean? That's my stumbling block.
Well, I mean, you're
I
sort
admit
of
judges a lot of randomness.
Yeah, you're sort of raising a philosophical question about what does it mean to mean? I mean, what does meaning really mean, right? How do things acquire meaning? And for some reason, this reminds me of this Minsky quote that I used in one of my recent conversations. This was with Eli Pavlik. who is, a young AI natural language researcher. And so I read out this passage from Minsky where he talks about what is meaning really, what's it really all about? And he says, it's the ability to sort of keep turning things around in your head. You sort of never come to a full stop, right? But if you can see something in only one way, you don't really understand it, right? So what he's saying is to understand something, you've got to be able to sort of turn it around in your head and to be able to look at it in all kinds of ways. And it seems to me that these very large, complex models seem to be sort of going down that road. It's almost like we seem to be coming back to that era of network representations, right? Where, things are connected to other things in all kinds of subtle ways. But in that symbolic era, we tried to specify it manually, right? We tried to say a man is related to a woman in this way, and we tried to write it down and just failed miserably, right? Because the world is too complex for us to specify. Whereas, what these, large neural nets seem to have done is they seem to have, by sort of not fettering them with our notions about the world, they seem to have sort of come up with these networks sort of more or less on their own. And maybe the next stage of AI will be to sort of make sense of these and have them resemble something that we actually understand.
I think that's a challenge. Going back to that thing I mentioned before about recognizing a wagon. And so humans, we recognize wagons no matter what the color, the size, no matter what it's made of. But also, when we see a wagon, one side of it, we see two wheels. We know there's two wheels on the other side. We know there's probably a cavity. We wouldn't be surprised if we look inside, we see some rocks or toys or sand or something like that. We know that if we pull that handle, the thing is going to go. If a grown-up and a kid walks up to it, we wouldn't be surprised to see the kid get inside and the grown-up pull it. We'd laugh if the kid pulled it and the grown-up didn't, sat inside. If the wagon's on a hill, we know that it's dangerous to get inside because it might go down the hill and crash. And we know all that stuff from living in the real world about how large language models, how in the heck are they ever going to know any of those things?
They're not, right? They're only going to know that to the extent that those things are expressed in language, right?
They can say the words. They can say the words.
Well, no. So they can go beyond that, right? So they could learn that it's dangerous when this carriage is pushed on top of the hill, that it could slide down.
Well,
right?
they could
learn that. Right. Well, yeah, but as long as it's been described in words. But I guess where I'm going with this is that we haven't even started on vision yet, right? When machines actually start seeing the world the way we do, because we don't learn just from language, we learn from seeing. And that's something that machines are doing very little of at the moment, right? But that's something we should expect, right? Well, all they see is pixels. But soon they'll be seeing, videos and, just sort of learning by looking at the world like we do, isn't it?
I don't know. I mean, that's a challenge. I don't know if they're going to be doing it soon to actually relate things to the real world.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how soon they're going to be doing it, right? It may be another 30 years or 70 years. I don't know, but that seems to be the trajectory.
But as I said before, and I think you agreed, that scaling up large language models is not going to get us there. We've got to add something else to the mix there, and something that allows us to actually relate to the real world, not just better at putting sentences together.
Absolutely. Again, I'm not the authority on this, but I would expect that at some point the scaling laws would kind of top out, and there's only so much you can get by sort of making things bigger and bigger and more complex.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
I think we were going to talk about education before.
Yeah.
Right?
So to come back to education, and not whether machines are going to replace or not, but do you think that what these models like ChatGPT have done is they've made our proxies obsolete? And what I mean by that is traditionally how we measure people, right? How we measure whether someone's understood something. We give them assignments, right? People do stuff. We aspire to give people critical thinking skills, but we do that through, assignments and lectures and exams and stuff like that, right? Are those proxies now obsolete with a tool like this?
I'm not sure. I think definitely what we strive for is what I often call a deep understanding of a situation. And so like that 3-card thing before, if you have a deep understanding, you know what the logic is, and you can figure out questions like that, as opposed to in what year was the Declaration of Independence signed, or who was the 16th president of the United States, that kind of stuff. And to learn that kind of stuff, I think you need to do somewhat different than just stand up there and lecture or have students read a book and memorize the facts in the book. And so what I've tried to do in my classes is a couple things. I'm very lucky. I teach at a small school. We have small classes, and so I can do this kind of stuff. And so one thing is I have these out-of-class assignments, which students work on in groups. And so in two-person groups typically. And they work on these things out of class. And then they come into the class and they present the results. And so they got to understand it. Like you and I as teachers know, to teach something, you got to understand it. And to really master it, you got to be able to explain it to others. And so these kids got to get up and they got to explain what they did and what their answer was. And they demonstrated deep understanding. Plus, they learned to communicate. They're practicing their communication skills, both their written and their oral communication skills. And I think that's a great educational model. Now, it's hard to scale that up to classes with, I had one of my sons went to Cornell and he had classes with 800 kids. I don't know what, maybe at the business school you have smaller classes, but I don't know what you do in those giant classes. But I think that is I love that model of students working on learning by doing, working in teams, and presenting results, because that's the real world for professional people.
Yeah, I mean the concern seems to be that people will just use ChatGPT to do their assignments, and
well, they can't do my
exams
assignments with ChatGPT.
Why is that?
They can't do my assignments with ChatGPT. I've actually given my exams to ChatGPT, and it does terrible. And that was one of the questions.
But what if it starts doing really well? Like, what happens then, right? Because it depends on what the questions are, right? So let's say you're teaching
that card question. I gave them that three-card question.
So let's say you're teaching the three-card question.
I teach stats, so I gave them the three-card question, and the students did well on it.
Yeah, but surely, to be fair, ChatGPT isn't trained to do stats or Bayes rule, but you can be reasonably sure that it will get good at math and science and statistics probably in the near future, I'd say. What would you do then? Right? And what if you give that problem and ChatGPT gets it right?
So what I think most teachers are doing is no more take-home assignments, no more quizzes online, and you got to show up in class without a computer and answer the questions. That's a simple fix. And so during the COVID time, when all the classes were taken remotely, you had all these assignments that were done remotely online, and you had all these things set up. I don't know the names of them, Clegg or something like that. They're Course Hero, where it wasn't ChatGPT, but students could look up the answers, and there was a repository of answers online, and it was just. It was, I don't want to say the dark ages, but it was a terrible time for education in this country. And studies are showing now that student test scores have dropped precipitously compared to previous generations, pre-COVID generations. And students learned very little during that period. And I don't think it was entirely due to online cheating, but that might have been part of it. So anyway, my short answer, the quick fix is when you give a test, you give it in class with no computers. And so they have no access to ChatGPT.
So you go low tech. I was hoping you'd give me some sort of high tech silver bullet here, because
no. Well, my bullet is group projects with oral presentations.
Yeah. No, actually, what I'm thinking of going to is oral exams, which will be quite onerous on me because I teach large classes, and so. But there may not be any way around that. I mean, when I was in engineering school, I did go to IIT, as ChatGPT correctly said. We used to have something called the Viva Voce, they called it, where, you basically showed up and, a bunch of professors would sit around the table and ask you a bunch of questions. It was quite terrifying, but it really made you prepare, and you sort of had to be able to sort of hold your own in a conversation, which I also believe to be a big part of education, right? Is to be able to learn so you can actually have a proper conversation with people in that area.
That's one of my pet peeves, is they say, who needs to teach writing anymore? I'll just have ChatGPT answer all my emails, write all my essays for me. And so we're going to get to a world where my chatbot talks to your chatbot, and you and I are just watching television or something.
Yeah, well, I think it's particularly difficult being an English professor these days, right? And telling people how to write. Yeah. But Gary, thanks for doing this. I really enjoy reading your writings. I find myself sort of occasionally sort of disagreeing with things, but that's fun too. So thanks for doing this and being the skeptic. We need more skeptics. So, that's all good. Is there anything I've missed that you want to, say or talk about before we wrap up?
No, it was great fun talking to you. You can put in a plug for my latest book. Actually got reviewed in Nature today. I was very pleased by that.
Awesome. I read parts of it. I really enjoyed the AI Delusion, which you sent me many years ago. I was traveling in India while I read it, and it did give me some chuckles. There were several examples, like the one about coffee. The result that was withdrawn or retracted.
Yeah, it was supposed to cause ulcers or something.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was the other way around, that people who had ulcers stopped drinking coffee, and so it wasn't the
right. So I enjoyed the book. There were lots of great examples. There were some examples where I said, "Come on, Gary, surely, like you're not going to be that stupid to believe that the market depends on the level of a river in Bangladesh." But plenty of good examples, and I'm enjoying your data torture either. And congrats on getting it reviewed in Nature.
Well, the latest book, it's got a lot more stuff on disinformation, because I think that's we didn't talk about it very much, but I think that's one of the biggest one of the biggest dangers now with large language models is they can just crank out disinformation so fast and so believably. And they're really, really good at that.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, that's something we didn't talk about. Maybe we'll say that for another talk about what happens when you can't tell the truth anymore. That's
sure.
A big problem facing us. Well, Gary, okay. It's been fun. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yep. I did too. Thank you for inviting me.